Okay, how are you? Good to know. Really good.
I'm happy.
Hello. Yeah.
You ready, Mike?
I will be, yeah. It's opening. We're good. Yeah, it's connected. Yeah, I'll be
Okay.
ready.
Alrighty, we'll get started. Welcome, everyone, to the October 16th, 2024 Cottonwood Heights Planning Commission work session. Great to see everyone. Couple of things that we'll talk about the work session. First, taking a look at the business session agenda. We have two items. One is to talk about proposal to build a 36-unit residential condominium building at Canyon Center, and then we have consent agenda for the meeting minutes. So without further ado.
Just a little more further.
Okay.
That's okay. It's opening now.
While we're waiting, just a reminder of, it's at the bottom about that our next meeting is October 29th. Is a joint session with the city council,
Yeah,
and that's 5:30.
5:30. Yeah.
Okay.
You
That's
should be
5:30.
receiving agendas for that
Oh, perfect.
next week.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I should be ready now.
Okay.
Share my screen. Okay. So one item on the agenda tonight, one that, those that have been on the commission or engaged with the city long enough will certainly recognize, because it feels like this Canyon Center project just kind of goes on forever and ever. But this is a request to amend actually one of the previous approvals within the Canyon Center development site. The project is titled Appray Condominiums by the applicant, but it's a conditional use permit amendment of actually the original site master plan approval that was granted, I think, back in 2012 or 2013 or 2014, in that timeframe. So I'll get into that and kind of walk you through some of the background and some of the context there. The staff report is in way more detail than the presentation, so this is slightly abbreviated, but we can stop at any point and address any questions you have. So again, the address is 7367 South Canyon Center Parkway. That address is actually a condominiumized unit that sits on top of the existing parking structure. So the parcel itself is about half an acre, but that's just the area that's right on top of that parking structure. And that's where the office building was entitled, and this condominium building would take its place. They're proposing a 36-unit for sale condominium, market rate condominium project at this site, in place of a 65,000 square foot office building, which is already entitled. The applicant is Chris Enzyme with Solstice Development. I do believe he'll be joining us here tonight. Okay, some background. This is part of the Canyon Center Master Development Plan, originally approved in 2014, and I do believe some of the development agreement side of this was in the works much before that with the city council. But the original site master plan was approved in about 2014. Subsequent uses and phases have received approval. It seems like every year another phase comes online in this. So the different uses already entitled and or fully constructed and occupied on site are listed here. There's the parking structure that serves the private businesses, but also provides public parking. It's referred to in the development agreement as Canyon Recreation Parking, and that's the public use there. Numerous commercial and retail spaces. There's two current restaurants, another under construction, and some other retail spaces there. A hotel that is, I believe, 149 rooms. That's the Courtyard Marriott that exists up there and is open. A single family neighborhood off to the south of that site. Those are 17 single family homes. We're actually the first thing built in that whole site originally, but those are existing there. There's the rental apartments, which is labeled on this plan as Canyon Center Heights, if you can see that. Those are unbuilt, but they are entitled. So the owner of that would just need to submit building plans for review. That's fronting on Racket Club Drive, and that is now 140 units. And then a public plaza, which is shown in the middle, the central location there. That will be deeded and dedicated over to the city and be able to be used and maintained by the city. The way it's laid out right now is that comes towards the end of the project as tax increment financing accrues and the city can pay for those public space improvements. And then the office building. Right now, that's entitled at 65,000 square feet. Obviously, it's unbuilt, but it is entitled, and the amendment request is to replace that with the market rate condominiums. Some other background that is relevant to know, but not directly part of the commission scope, is this is also part of a community development area. It receives tax increment financing from the various applicable taxing entities in the area. That CDA plan includes not only a plan, but also a budget with financial projections of the tax increment value received from the various uses. Obviously today that projects office value and not condominium value. But that's governed by the city council in wearing different hats as the Community Development and Renewal Agency, or CDRA. So that agreement runs through them. And then various interlocal agreements with each of the taxing entities. That all project TIF revenue based on the uses within the project. You'll notice, as one of the recommended conditions, big part of this process is that those development agreements all need to be amended to also reflect this change. Again, outside the Planning Commission's land use scope, but very important to this project ever moving forward. So basically one can't happen without the other and vice versa. So they both need to happen before the condominium use can move forward. Amendment of those agreements are required and underway, but again, outside the land use role. Some additional background: building height has all been entitled and approved. So this proposal is proposing not to modify that, but to follow that as well. There were some height diagrams. This was all part of that original site development master plan that was approved and agreed upon. And there are no changes proposed to this. That building would adhere to all of the requirements in here as well.
So I did have a question about that.
Yeah.
So if this weren't already previously approved, what would be the building height for this kind of building?
They could probably go through a similar process to request this height that's approved, but this is one of those where the default height in mixed use is 2 stories or 35 feet, and then they can request a 3rd story, but it requires conditional use approval. There's part of this that, back before this was ever Canyon Center, when this was the racket clubs, there was an existing grade that is long gone today. So part of this original process was establishing where that existing grade was and what's above existing grade and what's below it. You can't see any of that out on site today. So that would be the scope, is establishing all of those things, the conditional use review of is the extra height warranted or merited or not, and going through that process. But because that's already all been done, that entitlement sits in place.
Okay. Even though it's a different use.
Yeah, it's a different use. It's the same. It's in the same box. That's already.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Thanks.
Again, some more background. This was the very original approved office building design and architecture. South is to the right here. This is looking from within the Canyon Center property, from Canyon Center Parkway, looking east, and then the hotel would be to the left of this building in this rendering. That was the original approval, and the original architecture design for Canyon Center is much different than what we see today. Again, in 2018, the actual office building, through the Architecture Review Commission, underwent an architecture modification and received this approval, which again, same building massing, same general design, different colors, different architectural style, materials, that kind of thing. So this is technically what the approval that sits in place today is: this building, this architectural design. One thing I included here that I think is helpful from that process, they did a rendering of the visual impact of this from Wasatch Boulevard, which sits much higher. You see if you drive there, there's a lot of retaining walls holding up, Wasatch, and the site sits well below that. So you can see it 2.5 stories above that southern tip of Wasatch Boulevard. Obviously, that height impact changes as you move north along Wasatch Boulevard, but that's the general rendering of that view impact. With the condo building, I don't think it would be substantially different than that. But that gets us to the actual proposed condominium building. As I said, this is a for sale condominium product that's been proposed, 36 condominium units. These are the elevations and renderings of that. So, a similar design, similar massing, similar details to the office space, obviously with some residential details like porches and patios and things like that that you don't get as much of on the office building concept. And then that would be the rendering from the east, which would, or from Wasatch Boulevard, so you can kind of get a sense of that there. We've done an impact analysis, and there's more detail on this in the staff report, but just some comparisons. The height, measuring it the way it was measured in that 2013 entitlement, which is a little wonky, but it nets out at 48 feet following that system of measurement. The new proposed building is the same. And I believe that's going to be from, that finished grade that you see today, not the existing grade that was in place before Canyon Center existed. Parking for the office was a requirement of 4 stalls per 1,000 square feet, 65,000 square feet. That was 260 stalls. Some of those were exclusively owned by the office and entitled for the office. Some were combined with the public parking arrangement that was set up. That shared parking agreement included some caveats for, during daytime weekday hours, stalls would be allocated for office use. During nights and weekends, those shifted and became available for public parking instead. Commissioner Shelton, I did find that parking plan. What it has right now is there's 55 total stalls that are 24/7 entitled for the office use. So 55 total. And then the rest of them were kind of those hybrid stalls of office use during the day, public use during nights and weekends. Traffic impact was about 746 trips on an average weekday generated by the office use at full occupancy. And then the density there, it's not a residential use, so that's not applicable. Condominium, the parking requirement per code is 1.27 stalls per unit, which nets out to 46 total stalls. Obviously, a drastic reduction in parking demand from the office building. Traffic trip generation estimation is 164 trips on an average weekday, as opposed to 746. This memo was attached to your packet, but this was also reviewed by the city engineer. And they generally agree with the methodology and the conclusions there. And then the density, we're adding 36 units. The mixed use ordinance allows, as a permitted right, 35 units per acre in the mixed use zone. We look at the entire Canyon Center project as that project area. It's about just shy of 11 acres. But what that nets out to over the entire site, when you add the other residential uses, including this one, you get a total count of now 193 units, which is 17 units per acre, or only about half of the total allowable density per ordinance. So not an issue with that density limit as well. One thing we looked at, and one of the conditions that's reflected is, even though the trip generation is much less than the office building, there's been an outstanding concern, and this has been flagged in previous traffic studies that basically says, hey, there's one turn movement generated from this site that creates a failing condition, and it's the left-hand turn movement from Canyon Center Parkway onto Wasatch Boulevard. It creates a queue distance that's a tough turn to make with visibility and roadway speeds, and you're crossing numerous lanes of traffic. So the analysis shows that traffic stacks up trying to make that left-hand turn. The city recently restriped Canyon Center Parkway, and if you actually go out there right now, it does say right turn only, and tries to, through striping, force cars to turn right. But there is an outstanding deficiency there and a recommendation to physically restrict that left turn movement out of there. And even though this is generating much fewer trips per day, it is still generating more trips per day than we see today. So it's exacerbating that failing condition. So we are recommending as a condition of this approval that the applicant, as part of the building permit process, as construction gets underway, that they work with the Public Works Department and install some sort of, left turn prohibited infrastructure on the city's right-of-way side of this, not out on Wasatch Boulevard, which is outside of the city's jurisdiction, but something there that restricts that left turn even further than the striping today. Just a quick summary of the impact analysis we went through, and this is provided in more detail in your report. The architecture, materials, design, landscaping, all of those things are subject to Architecture Commission review. The ARC doesn't have the ability to say, oh yeah, because of your great design, your building height can be bigger, or we want you to put more units in or anything like that. That's the commission's authority. But they do have the role and the authority of approving the final architectural design, materials, landscaping, those kind of things. This is scheduled right now tentatively for next week's Architecture Commission meeting, pending us hearing back from them on whether we have a quorum or not. But this will have to go to the ARC no matter what to get a certificate of design compliance. Utility impact, we typically look most closely at water and sewer. They will be required to submit updated will serve letters to ensure that the utilities in the area can handle the demand on those services created by this residential use. This will also go through typical city review for stormwater and other utilities as well. Lighting, building lighting, we are suggesting, because it never happened with the office building, we're suggesting that any building lighting and site lighting comply with current outdoor lighting standards. Trash pickup and site maintenance, they included a bit on this in their narrative, but they're proposing to utilize a space within the parking structure for dumpster, trash removal and dumpster pickup, which is great. It's out of sight. It's not out in the public areas of this site. We've just recommended a condition that, a plan be submitted that it is properly screened from view, which is typically a requirement in the mixed use ordinance. And that it doesn't interfere with the normal circulation of cars that rely on that same garage entry for ingress and egress.
Mike, where in the lighting, the outdoor lighting, does this fall in our zones as you get closer to the mountain?
This is west of Wasatch.
Okay.
So the cutoff there is east of Wasatch, west of Wasatch. So this is on the west side of that.
But just to remind the public and those who weren't here when we were working on that we were concerned about light pollution and that the guidelines still with a new build like this.
Yeah.
It's not as restricted, but it is still restricted in terms of the types of lighting. We're trying to do better as a city.
Yeah.
And that lighting ordinance, if you haven't had a chance to poke around a little bit, we went way down the rabbit hole. And Commissioner Shelton, I think you were on the council when we sent that up to you guys in my early days here, but that's
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, what that does is limit the total output of lighting within a project site. Obviously, this is part of an established development, so I think the wording is, hey, get as close as possible to compliance, but we can certainly require that in terms of lighting cutoff.
Yes.
The intensity of light fixtures, the Kelvin, basically the color temperature of those fixtures. And our ordinance dictates all of those standards. Landscaping, there's minimal proposed, but we are just recommending that it be compliant with the city's, again, current landscaping standards, which has language for, making sure that landscaping palettes are appropriate for the climate here, they're water efficient, those kind of things. Most of, I think, the landscaping being done is either around the little roundabout turnaround that they will need to finish, and then within like the rooftop deck areas of the actual condominium building. So it's fairly minimal, but we do want to make sure it does comply with current city standards. And that is also subject to ARC approval as well.
Are there agreements about snow removal with the other tenants?
We are, yes, that's a good question. We are asking for site maintenance, snow removal, that kind of thing, just to make sure they do have an HOA that's in place there and active, but to make sure the change of use is properly reflected in that, and then they provide a copy of that to us. Sensitive lands, this site is home to numerous sensitive land hazards, particularly fault rupture hazards that run through the middle of the site. Site hazard mitigation was extensive and was previously approved before the city issued the permit for the actual parking structure. And I have a map in a couple slides that shows this. Because this is on top of the parking structure, it's not impeding on that fault hazard zone. It all exists outside of the fault hazard area that was required by their fault studies originally. That being said, the building permit will still be subject to full review by city staff for compliance. If there's anything else in SLEDs that would apply, it would be filtered through that building permit review. But the major one is the fault setback, and that has already been mitigated. And then construction, we hear this quite a bit of the inconvenience of construction, and it is a reality, but our ordinance has a construction mitigation plan that dictates hours of operation, where you're going to stage and park your construction crews and have construction signage and contact info and all that. That's a code requirement regardless, but we did recommend a specific condition that they submit that to us as well.
Does that include the fact that all those heavy trucks and that many trips over our road is gonna beat the tar out of that road and
Yeah,
it
good
will
question.
prematurely wear and require the replacement at an earlier date because of that?
Yeah, good question. Typically, when new development occurs, if there are public improvements tied to that development, the Public Works Department looks at that and quantifies, hey, your public improvements total this much cost. And then they submit a bond to cover the cost of that. And I believe that's something that may be covered in that process. Typically, it's erosion control and, stormwater and, if there's any public streetlights, those things, if there's stormwater infrastructure that needs to be installed, the developer does that at their cost, but the city bonds for it and inspects it to make sure it meets city standards before taking it over. And then when those things are done and inspected and approved, the developer gets their bond deposit back. This is a diagram that shows kind of the fault hazards through the site. It's easier to see on this back TV here. It's a little fuzzy on the screen, but the gray area here, you can see the actual fault lines in kind of faint gray lines. Those are the fault lines that have been identified. And then the gray hatching there is the actual extent of the fault setback. So again, that parking structure was constructed with this in mind. And those studies are fairly technical. They actually assess the slope at which that fault line goes down underground. In some places gets closer to the parking structure. So the footing and foundation of that parking structure had to actually step in. So not only at the surface, but also subgrade, they're maintaining proper setbacks from the fault hazard zone. So again, the building is clear of that because the parking structure is clear of that, but we did note that in our review. As a reminder, conditional use authority in this role, a residential use on its own in the mixed use zone is a permitted use. So typically if this were a brand new build, you would see this for site plan approval, but not use approval. Because it's amending a previous conditional use, that's why it's coming through you for use and site approval, is because it's an amendment of an old conditional use. But the scope of the commission's review is strictly the condominium building in place of the office building. Review and conditions should be focused on the impacts of that change of use, that replacement building. Review of the rest of the site and other development agreements, tax increment financing, all that other stuff is important. It needs to happen, but is city council level authority that will run, in a parallel line from this process.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Please.
Does our approval of this conditional use revoke the previous conditional use? Or do they now have two
No,
conditional
It
uses?
supersedes it.
So that this ground would no longer be permitted for office.
If they change their mind after this,
They'd have to
they would
go
have to come
back.
back.
Come back again.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a lot of text. I just wanted to have all the conditions on here for the record. I do want to just read through these quick because there's some conditions here that tie into some of the context here that I didn't cover in this presentation. They're in the staff report, but I don't expect you to read all this or even be able to read all this. But the one is that all of those development agreements, interlocal agreements, the TIF project area documents be resolved prior to a building permit being issued for the condominium project. So approval of this doesn't fast track them to building permit. It actually doesn't give them, any additional advantage in that development agreement process other than this is a box they need to check in their process to convert this fully from office to condominiums. The applicant shall construct for sale condominium units as proposed. We've recommended that an increase or decrease of more than 2 units or a change to a rental product require additional review and consideration. The 2 units was, we just pulled that number, a flex of 1 unit in either direction, or even a couple doesn't change the impact analysis a whole lot. Anything more than that, and we start to change the dynamic a little bit. So that's why we recommended that.
Can I ask
Please.
a question I had?
Yeah.
Is there any kind of affordable housing requirement for this?
There's not. So typically in today's community development area requirements, which are now called, this is complicated, I'm sorry, community reinvestment areas. So there's CRAs, there is. So if they were doing this tax increment deal today, there's a required set aside of the revenues generated from that to be either funded on site or elsewhere in the city, specifically earmarked for affordable housing. CDAs, which this was approved under, is a previous version of that has no such requirement.
Okay.
And they are not proposing an affordable product here. So no,
Another
So-
question? Oh, go ahead.
please.
Go for it.
Would these units be in the short-term rental area or permitted
So
for
I
that?
think I have a line in the report that
It says
addresses that
no.
as well. So the zoning allows for it. But because it fronts on a public street, there is a short-term rental license would not be approved on these units. We've dealt with the same thing in the single-family neighborhood that's here because they're in a mixed-use zone. They're serviced off a private driveway, but addressed off of Canyon Center Parkway, which is a public street. And that addressing on a public street prohibits short-term rental licenses from being issued. So that would apply to this building as well as all the other residential uses in the Canyon Center site.
So because the TIF was approved under the CDA
Yeah,
and there was no affordable housing component to that, and now it has changed over to the CRA and it's going to a different use, is there?
this is not a CRA. This is still a CDA. If
And
we
it's
were
still
to
being funded
do
under the CRA,
this CDA.
CDA, okay.
Because we're now just amending old agreements to that CDA. Now, example, the town center, that's a newer project area. There's no taxing involvement in that yet, but that is a CRA. So there's slightly different rules. Affordable housing is kind of one of the big differences there. Yes,
Back back on the short-term rental, is there a provision that, as I recall, you have to have 30-day rental at least?
Yeah.
Not be short-term?
Yep.
What if they decide that they'll write that 30-day, knowing full well they're only gonna be 7?
that's a code enforcement, I'll say loophole. It's not a legal loophole. So we enforce based on the actual use taking place. Whether you have a lease agreement that says 10 years or 30 days, it's how you're using it that is the potential violation. Same time, it's an extreme challenge on enforcing that and proving that, and we're dealing with one in a neighborhood right now.
That was why I brought it up.
But a lease, a 30-day lease on its own does not legally get anyone around the requirements. It's how you're using the property. If you're still using it illegally, it's still a violation.
But then how do you enforce that?
Well, that's a whole broader discussion and relevant. I'll just say this quickly. The city council is starting a kind of an internal working group. And they will be asking, I think, a member of the planning commission to be on that to address and look at short-term rental policy enforcement, look at these things. That's on their radar.
Right.
Why I think this condition is important is the use in mixed use is technically just multifamily residential. But we also feel that an apartment project has a different enough dynamic and impact from a condominium building. So we wanted to make sure that the review, the impact that we're doing here is specifically focused on a condominium use. If they change that in the future, that use category may still be allowed, but we're just saying, hey, we think that should be re-reviewed if this becomes a rental project rather than a condominium project. They've committed and said everywhere this is a condominium project only. So I don't think that'll be an issue, but I just wanted to make sure that broad language in the ordinance didn't result in a quick change from condos to apartments overnight. Number 3, the applicant shall submit an updated shared parking agreement. This is something in that development agreement. As part of its required development agreement update that demonstrates the requisite amount of parking allocated for the proposed use, again, by city standard 45 stalls. Additionally, the applicant should utilize excess parking in beneficial ways. They don't need 260 stalls anymore. So come up with creative ways to use that additional parking, such as additional public parking, overnight guest parking for people in the area, bicycle parking, other things that aren't just this extra parking that's kind of in this no man's land at certain times.
Can we change the phrasing to beneficial ways to others? Because I'm
Sure.
I'm imagining, I have a condo where in the parking garage, they have chewed up probably 4 to 6 parking spots for the storage of the garbage and the trash.
Sure,
To
yeah.
close that off. So
Totally
that
fair.
just the calculation, which I think hiding it is great, not having it outside the building spot on, but let's make sure that we're recognizing that as we figure out what portion is parking, where the garbage is gonna go, and that beneficial, that's good for them, but let's,
Yeah, no, that's great. That's something that think you can fully add as you supplement if you make a motion or when, you could add into there. And then we just clarify alternate utilization of that excess parking ultimately is subject to that development agreement and approval by the CDRA. Commissioner Shelton brought up a point earlier that some of that office parking was only part-time office parking. So even though only 45 stalls is required, the applicant may be intending to have more specifically used for their condominium projects. So I think it's also a fair thing to look at, supplementing this condition with some language that, hey, if any of the parking that they're purchasing for the condominium use conflicts with that public shared parking agreement, that be reconciled. Because I don't think it's anyone's intent for any condo parking to eat into the night and weekend public parking. And Commissioner Shelton raised the point that parking for an office building, it was easy to restrict kind of 8 to 5 or 8 to 6 p.m. because they come for the day and they leave, but it's different for condos when you have traffic there on nights and weekends specifically. So what options they could do is just utilize the 55 stalls that they have set aside. And they could look at, some sort of part-time, guest parking only during those daytime windows. But I think it is a fair comment that he brought up with me to make sure that they are not fully taking over on a 24/7 basis some of those stalls that are already earmarked and agreed upon for night, weekend, holiday public parking. 4, based on evidence provided by the traffic study in previous Canyon Center traffic studies, as well as staff review, the applicant shall install permanent infrastructure prohibiting left-hand turns from Canyon Center Parkway onto Wasatch Boulevard, subject to review by the Public Works Department prior to final occupancy being granted for those condominium units. The proposed building shall not exceed the originally entitled standards for building height and massing. It's not proposed to, but we're just
Same square footage.
generally, yeah.
Is there
I mean, it's all confined to that pad area, so it
Can't
it
get
can
too
only
much
get
more.
smaller, yeah.
Mike, I don't want this to be a controversial question, but I know that the neighbors at the time were really, really concerned about height.
Mhm.
And I don't know if there's any alternative solutions. I mean, putting HVAC and cooling on top and just, covering it. I mean, I wonder about noise. I wonder about just with the renderings. Is there anything that can be done to lower things? I mean, maybe the stuff that's around it, it's gonna make that an irrelevant issue because, where the rest of the heights are, but
Yeah, I believe, because we're looking at the difference in impact between office and condos. The office is already,
they could do it.
you deny this, they apply for an office permit today, they just build it.
Yep.
As shown, basically.
Absolutely.
So it's hard to justify a condition of approval that says, yes, but because it's condos, it warrants less height. The city council sure could look at that. That's a negotiation because they are, the master developer Canyon Center is asking the council for a new agreement terms with different financial projections. And that's a negotiation. So they would have that authority if that's something that they wanted to look at. It'd be harder, in my opinion, for the commission to get into that just solely based on office versus condos alone.
Got it. Thank you.
The proposed building is subject to review and approval by the ARC, shall receive a certificate of design compliance as required by code. Prior to issuance of a building permit, will serve letters from utilities should be submitted to justify that the site can serve this use and that any upgrades are done. Same thing with stormwater compliance from the city stormwater manager. All roof mounted mechanical equipment shall be properly screened. And such screening shall be designed to be compatible with the architectural design of the building. That's shown on the plans. We just want to make sure it's not, doesn't become a little stucco wall that just, gets put in last minute. The applicant shall submit additional detail on the site landscaping, subject to review and approval by the ARC. That would include, a more detailed planting plan, things that the ARC would ask for anyways. It's just a little general right now. Again, subject to certificate of design compliance by the ARC. And then again, clarifying that landscaping should be compliant with both existing site landscaping, but also the city's current landscaping standards. Same thing on site lighting, submitting a compliant lighting plan, which has some photometric details and other things that are required for non-single family development. Compliant with the city's outdoor lighting standards as part of that building permit review process. Submittal of a detailed trash pickup plan. Some control centers in my way here. Yeah. Any new dumpster visible from the public right of way shall be properly screened, and service to the dumpster shall not interrupt the regular flow of traffic in and out of the parking structure. And then a site maintenance plan for site maintenance, snow removal, those kind of things, making sure that the new use is accounted for in those HOA documents. And then just catch all, the applicant shall address any other technical correction items required by ordinance and identified by all applicable city departments. I've got the findings of fact. This is a legal requirement to publish these. I didn't reiterate them here. I won't read through them. They are in the staff reports. And then I've got model motions. So I will turn it back to the commission for questions and discussion.
I have one other question about short-term rentals.
Sure.
Is there a way to put anything within any kind of document or something that says that these need to follow the current guidelines of Cottonwood Heights, which currently states no short-term rentals in this building? And then that could change. That's why you can't say it
Yeah.
could never happen. But I think that given the location of where this is, it's prime
Sure.
for short-term rentals. So I'm just trying, is there some language or something we could do to scare potential buyers away from thinking they're gonna get this and use it for short-term rental?
I think that's a reasonable, if you can find a reasonable way to mitigate a potential negative impact, that is one that doesn't exist with office. The residential project, we hear a lot that there are enforcement challenges and issues with short-term rentals. City's current code doesn't allow them. So I do think it's appropriate for the commission to offer a condition of approval. How far you want to go with that, I think is up to you. If you want to just state in the staff report as a condition of approval, these units shall comply with the city's short-term rental ordinances.
Yeah, I think
That would be reasonable, I think.
What are the negative effects of short-term rentals in this building when right next door is 100% short-term rentals?
Well, I think one, it sets a precedent that's we have to enforce whatever the current code is.
Yeah.
And I think it could be potentially, damaging to value of those condominiums. It could number of cars that are in the parking lot. The things that typically happen with a neighborhood could happen here too. And I'm not saying we say that you can't have short-term rentals here. I'm proposing that we have a condition be that it's clearly stated that it follows.
The city has said you can't have short-term rentals there.
Yeah,
So
it's already in place. The
it
condition
could
would be-
change, but that's the way
Yeah.
it's restated.
It'd be reiterating what is already in code. It also doesn't preclude them, if you word it that way, from, say the city policy does change,
Right.
from being eligible for that at a, future date.
Can we add to one of the issues sometimes is that if the HOA is not communicating at the time of a sale and somebody buys it, let's think down the road 10 years, somebody buys it in good faith. And then, I'm wondering if I like you're adding these units shall comply with the city short-term rental policy. And I might add, and the HOA will bear responsibility for communicating to potential buyers said policy.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would be a little hesitant if you were saying, hey, you have to do this specific way of
Agreed.
communicating, but if you're just saying, hey, it should be
Just communicate.
communicated
Yeah.
somehow, that's
Yeah.
great. I think that's appropriate.
Any other thoughts or questions that we,
I'm curious, what is it about being located where it is that would prohibit the short-term rental because it's facing Wasatch?
It's addressed on a public street, which is Canyon Center Parkway.
Okay,
It technically fronts on a public street.
and what's the rationale for that
That's
prohibition?
what's in our
That's the
short-term
way the
rental
code
code.
reads.
Yeah,
So
Okay,
part of me, because this is next door to a full-time short-term rental, is to think about allowing short-term rentals here. Primarily because I see that as a potential for property values to increase in that area. Historically, short-term rentals, especially with the limitations of short-term rentals in Cottonwood Heights, and this being a perfect area for short-term rentals, us being able to accommodate and say, hey, this is a precedent, this is an area that does allow short-term rentals. I don't know if that's the intent whatsoever of the developer, however, it's right next door to a Marriott. It's prime location for short-term rentals, and if it is managed by a professional HOA, I think there could be some interesting things to allow for short-term rentals here. Which I think will increase values, will increase, overall experience in that area.
Yeah,
That code is not in our scope, though.
Yeah.
that would be a code amendment. It also hasn't been proposed as short-term rentals. I
Okay.
want to be clear, the applicant's not trying to do this and we're saying, no. I do think if they were interested in that, this is a mixed use zone. You can mix uses within a building. You could have part of that building be a hotel use,
Yeah.
which is a compliant way in today's zoning to allow for short-term occupancy. It does change the impact analysis slightly.
But they're so far below
But they
any of the
could.
impact right now.
They could have done that, but they've proposed this, for sale condominium project, but valid points as the city gets into, short-term rental policies in general.
Yeah.
Certainly, I think those things should be on the table at that point. I also don't know if there may be agreements in place in the HOA between the hotel and other uses that already, just from a private side, limit.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's, some sort of clause in there that says, hey, you can't have another hotel next to us because we're the entire hotel in here. I don't know, but there may be. I just wanted to clarify because I know that question comes up and we ran into this issue with the single family product of that there were some houses in there doing short-term rentals and it became an enforcement thing.
I would just hate to further prohibit something that could be advantageous for the community and for the city
Yeah,
in that area, just because it's already a use there or next door virtually.
yeah. I would say with this, it's not further prohibiting anything. It's just reminding, hey, we have a city ordinance, make sure your buyers are aware of what that
Yeah.
says.
Mike, with the shielding for the stuff on the roof, just assume, you're involved with the ARC as well,
Yeah,
correct?
uh-huh.
So, would you just flag, because I don't know that, there are probably many members of the ARC that were involved with the original issue where it started out shielding and then it talked about rooftop and then it
Yes.
turned into enclosed space. And it
Correct.
was like mission creep into another floor. So I wanted, if there's anything that we need to memorialize here in terms of the recommendations, I'd rather state it here that we're just talking about HVAC up there with shielding. You're not gonna turn this into rooftop living space. And you're
Yeah.
definitely not gonna close it and turn it into another floor.
Sure. I think you're welcome to add that in a condition. I do also believe the condition that they have to comply with the entitled building height and massing standards would cover that. But it's a good point. That other product showed one space, but it was all under that maximum building height. So when they came in and enclosed it.
Mhm.
So if you want to add a clarification, that'd be fine. I do think we're okay, but
Okay.
up to you.
What was our green space requirement on this?
Well, it was part of a site development master plan, so I don't know the exact requirement, but this is essentially what was approved. And this included the open space elements of that. Most of it is that future city-owned plaza.
And as soon as this is complete, that plaza is going to start.
Not necessarily. That plaza cannot start till the city accrues enough tax increment financing to construct it. The design is happening right now. So we're master planning, we're designing it. And then once we accrue enough tax increment revenue to build it, then we'll go ahead and do that.
Any other questions or information you need from staff to be able to work through this further later?
I think we got it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
The other item we have is about meeting minutes from August 7th. We could talk about those now if there's any questions, and then be able to just note what we talked about in our business session. Did anybody have feedback? Besides me, of course, because did anyone have feedback on the minutes? Okay, well then I go. On page 7, it talks about acting chair me. But then it said Dan was opening, Commissioner Mills was opening the meeting. I don't believe this was I know there was a meeting where I did, Dan was out and I chaired it, but I don't believe this was it. And then the work, because the work session talks about Commissioner Mills being there and chairing it and running the meeting, but then it says I was acting.
Let me go ahead and review.
Okay. That was all.
Good catch.
Okay. All right, well, are there any other updates or do we have any questions for Mike or Ian about?
It's- Sam might have a comment. I don't know if
Go
you want to
Yeah,
start her
yeah.
off.
Or Sam, yeah.
She's just messaging me.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no, I'm all good. It was resolved.
Okay.
Good.
Okay.
Does anyone want to hear about a billboard?
Yeah,
Any
let's
calls
do
on that?
it. Let's talk about
I've
it.
been talking about it all.
It's the elephant in the room.
Did you see the
7-Eleven.
conversation our city council member had in the last 2 hours?
I didn't see it, but I think I know, what it's about. But, no, so that billboard being constructed down at 7-Eleven right now is the result of a state code provision that allows billboard companies to relocate existing billboards within a mile of its original location, if it's in a commercial area. It states that the relocated billboard is subject to certain height standards. If it's already over 45 feet, it can stay over 45 feet. If it's under, it can go up to 45. And then the actual face of the sign itself just has to be the same size or smaller as the relocated one. That approval, that almost completely bypasses any city authority. They've essentially preempted city authority. So that approval was granted back in like 2021 or 2022 for this particular one. Their approval and their communication to the city shows that they are relocating the billboard from the shopping plaza with the liquor store west of Highland Drive up to this location, which is within a mile, which is a large billboard. What we're hearing now is no, they're actually trying to relocate the billboard that's right next to this at the dry cleaner property on 2300 East to this location. That raised some flags in the city's review of this because that's not what is documented in our approval and what they've conveyed to us. And also that billboard is a single wide billboard, not the double wide. So that would directly impact the size of it. So now we're working with Reagan Outdoor Advertising to get clarification. The bottom line is they're still able to put a billboard at this location. It is a little dependent on what they consider their relocated billboard, and whatever one they say is relocated, that existing one has to then come down. They're looking at several different billboard relocations, most within the same 1 mile radius. So they could move a smaller billboard to the 7-Eleven location. They could also send that one down the road further if they wanted and put a smaller one somewhere else, and the big one here could stay. So that's the bottom line. That once the city has confirmation on exactly what Reagan is doing, we'll have them update their, the submittal they sent to the city, and then we'll put out some public information on that. But this is all, stemming from that state code provision that basically, if they submitted a request to us and we just didn't respond, they, after 6 months, could go ahead and do it.
Isn't it possible for cities to prohibit billboard? Doesn't Mill Creek?
Prohibit new ones,
Oh,
but you
new ones.
cannot prohibit the relocation of existing.
Can you propose the one in my parking lot to be relocated? please? Who can I talk to?
Yeah.
Call Reagan, they're looking for.
Well, okay.
You know what, Reagan's difficult.
This is from Matt Holton in the last 2 hours. Councilman Holton, neighbors, after hearing from many of you on this page about the billboard under construction, I contacted Mr. Reagan to discuss our community's concerns regarding its placement. State law stipulates the relocation of billboards, limiting the city's control over the placement. However, I explained the importance of this area to our city in the upcoming resident vote on the Hillside Plaza development on November 5th. A billboard at this location would obstruct the open views that are a key feature of the proposed plaza. While Mr. Reagan began the relocation process before the city purchased the Hillside Plaza, it is clear that he understands our community's concerns. He has committed to working with the city to find an alternative location if the city goes forward with the Hillside development, ensuring the plaza retains its intended open feel. I appreciate Mr. Reagan's willingness to find a solution that works for the residents. So,
Okay,
but that's just words, so.
Yeah.
We'll see. I'm grateful that Councilman Holton has initiated that conversation. And
Sure.
again, just words. We'll see if he talks to the city, of course. So
So after they build it, how long before they must tear down the one that they're
it
replacing?
doesn't say, their typical plan is like within a week it's down.
Oh, so it's,
So they always put the new ones up first.
no, I get
Issues
that.
arise
I'm just
after
wondering,
that.
because you could just say, well, we planning on it's coming down and then it doesn't and it doesn't and it doesn't.
There's another provision in the code that if they're, if the city feels, or the municipality, I guess, feels that they represented their proposal intentionally wrong, the city can say, okay, you have to remove this billboard, you represented this wrong. At which point they have 6 months to take corrective action to make it right.
So then depending, what I'm hearing then, from what you said, is that if they, depending on the one that they're replacing, that size that they put up may be changed. The one next door is smaller, so
Yeah.
they'd have to redo all this. If they do the one down the street by the liquor.
Yeah, they
liquor
need
store,
to-
It would be that size.
To definitely clarify which billboard's replacing which one, because what they represented to us and what we've heard they're actually doing don't match up currently. So we're working through that. So there's that.
Well, and then there's a private agreement that they have with 7-Eleven now, I would imagine.
Yep.
They're now doing a land lease.
Yeah, we ask for those. When the request comes in,
Yeah,
I think they could say, now that's a private thing that we'll work on, but they did. There is a documented owner agreement in this case with that property.
and if you've watched the news, 7-Eleven has plans to close over 500 stores nationwide. But the way that will happen is that December 31st, they're open, and January 1, they're closed. And so we have members of our community, they're trying to find out if that store is on that list or not, but nobody knows. Sounds like it's closely guarded.
and that's with private owned franchises?
I don't know the answer to that. I had that same question because there's a variety of ownership models with 7-Eleven.
So that one there is privately owned. Correct. So I'd be curious if that. has anything to do with- Interesting.
Interesting. So the way, if the billboard impacts visibility to existing businesses, like I'm thinking like Big O Tire or something, I guess it doesn't matter.
No, and there's one, right up by Canyon Center, 6 out, if you're sitting on the 8 Settlers patio, you stare out right at the back of
That's
the
true.
billboard.
That's very
Yeah.
true.
Have you seen the ones in Salt Lake City that are right in front of apartment windows? I mean, they're crazy. Yeah.
And this wouldn't be an electronic billboard, right?
No, so that is a conditional use process from the city. So I don't, there are standards for that and I haven't reviewed them. That would come through the planning commission. They have not talked about or made that sort of application yet.
Okay, well, thanks for that update.
Yeah.
Have they said that if the first advertisement on that board will be vote yes or vote no?
They didn't tell me that yet. No. I haven't mentioned that part of it.
We're not talking about what you're voting yes or no on because we don't speak of that, right?
Okay, anything else?
No, we mentioned the joint work session in a couple of weeks, so you'll have an agenda next week on that. We did just get a slightly updated form-based code draft. We'll get that posted, but that'll be
Good.
distributed as part of that agenda as well.
Was the appeal made for the old mill?
The variance is scheduled now for November 14th.
So it did not happen in October?
No,
Okay.
it got pushed from October at the property owner's request to
Okay.
November.
You know what time that will be? Has that been a noon one?
5, no,
Oh,
it's
5.
5 o'clock. I think.
Oh, got it. Okay,
There will be one other item though on that agenda that I expect will probably be scheduled first. So I don't think the variance will be like right at 5. I think we'll do the shorter item first, given that the variance will likely take more discussion. So
Okay.
heads up there if you're wanting to attend.
thank you. Thanks for that. All right. Well, we'll wrap up.
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Great. We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Perfect. Great. See you in